All right, so I had to go back and I was trying to figure out where exactly in my notes we were on Samuel. So I had to go back and watch the last video we did on Samuel, and it was a year ago. So it's been some time. I'm not sure how that happened. It was not on purpose, I assure you, but there were a lot of other things that kind of got interjected. We had the liturgy class, which I know was reasonably well attended and reasonably needed. A lot of people appreciated it, the lessons learned about the liturgy there. So I'm glad we did it, but it did kind of become an animal on its own and really took over what we were doing before with Samuel. We also had the High Holy Days, which we always took off for, and a smattering of other things. We try to get other teachers in here to get different voices and different thoughts, just to give y'all different material to work with from time to time. So the year can go by very quickly, and it kind of took over. So that's how we ended up here where we are today. But the goal is, of course, to at this point to keep just walking through Samuel. There were several other things in the schedule that I've nixed just so we could retrain our focus to Samuel and then move on. We'll move on to something else when we get to something else. So, but anyway. So to recap, Samuel is a miracle child. He's an answer to prayer, specifically Hannah's prayer. She prays for him while up at Shiloh celebrating one of the feasts, visiting the tabernacle with her husband and their family. And of course she's praying, and it's Eli who sees her at the door to, we could presume the courtyard, possibly even the tent itself. He thinks she's drunk. She's not drunk. She's just weeping bitterly and praying that, in her, depression really, that at not having a child. And when he finds this out, of course, he tells her to go, and that that may God hear her voice, and then she has a child. She weans him, brings him to the temple, or tabernacle at this point, and he is then raised as one of the many, we don't know how many there would have been, but there were children raised in the vicinity of the temple, serving alongside the many different adults there. And remember, Samuel was a Levite, so this is his inheritance. This is going to be the work that he's going to end up likely doing anyway, is serving and maintaining the tabernacle. So, let's see. He's a faithful servant in the tabernacle. He listens to the Lord when the Lord comes and visits him. When the word actually comes, the Logos comes to the tabernacle and speaks, Eli tells him to listen, and Samuel listens. And he is held up in contrast to Eli's sons, who are not faithful, disobedient, and they rob the people of the blessings of the offerings. And in doing so, they also rob God of the blessing of the sacrifices that are being brought. They cheat which kind of meats are being offered up, and they keep too much for themselves, or the cuts that should go to God, they keep for themselves, just in their greed. But so they're killed. Eli falls and dies. And Samuel continues on in his work there. Then it jumps, side story, jumps over to the Israelites fighting the Philistines, which is a major theme of Judges leading into Samuel, all the way through parts of Kings. There's a constant battle between these two nations. And so the Israelites go and get the ark. They're like, this we will allow to go before us, almost trying to force it where, well, if we take the ark out in front of the Philistines, God has to go with us. God has to be with us because that's his ark, and he has to go with it. As if God has to do anything. There is no, those are always very dangerous phrases whenever you hear them. Oh, God had to do. God didn't have to do anything. It just doesn't work that way. So they bring it out. It's stolen. It disappears into the Philistine regions, where, of course, it begins to bring curses to the Philistines. It brings down one of their large idols, idol of Dagon. And so they begin to schlep it around the countryside, trying to get it to go away. Where will God take it? And brings, wherever it goes, it brings curses to the Philistines. So they put up offerings onto, they put up gold effigies onto the little ox cart that they have it on, and offerings, and they send it off, and it eventually arrives back in Israel, where it disappears into a gentleman's property, and he ends up kind of getting stuck in his barn. Not like caught stuck, but just it arrives, they put it in the barn, and that's where it stays for about 20 years. It doesn't, which is kind of crazy. That would be, I'm trying to even think of what a modern example of that would be. Can't really think of anything. Well, it would be, okay, everyone's seen National Treasure, right?
Yeah.
It would be like the Declaration of Independence arriving in its frame to your house, and you just being like, cool. We'll put it for safekeeping away. It'll be safe. It'll be fine. But it's at my house, and you know where it's not supposed to be? Your house. So it's very much like that. The ark arrives there, and it remains there. And of course, later on, as we were reading in chapter 7, that several Israelite men they begin to they handle the ark in a way that's kind of disrespectful, looking inside of it. And so we get this idea that, to an extent, Israel in many ways is unfamiliar with her own God, which would explain why so often they find themselves worshiping other gods, because they're outside of the cult of the tabernacle. And again, cult is not a bad word in that sense. Cultic just means something that is, you can't just walk and join. You can't just be a part of by virtue of wanting to. The tabernacle, the sons of Aaron are cultic in the sense that you have to be a son of Aaron. You have to be a Levite to be a part of it. They are, even despite all the misgivings that come with the Levitical priests and the sons of Aaron, they do maintain the Torah and its offerings and the things that have to happen in the tabernacle. But Israel seems to struggle with understanding and knowing her own God. And of course, there are people like Samuel who are going to be trying to lead them back to that, at least with what they can. Because remember, Samuel is running a ministry when the ark is outside of the tabernacle is no longer functioning as the place of offerings. Samuel travels between 3 different towns and runs essentially a traveling ministry. And that's not, even today, that's not terribly uncommon for rural areas to have a pastor, or, if you're Catholic, a priest, who will jump from parish to parish. It's like, okay, it's Sunday, but we don't go Sunday morning because we're number 3 on this route. So that means, if you're Catholic, Mass isn't going to be till 4 because the priest isn't going to get there until later in the day. And that's essentially what Samuel is doing. Samuel is rotating between these 3 towns, not necessarily on the same day, but within a week's period, traveling so he can make these different offerings to God on behalf of the people while they're there. And again, you can't make every offering there because some of the offerings can only be offered on the altar of the tabernacle. But there are some, like the Thanksgiving offering, the offering of Thanksgiving, a peace that can be offered outside of the tabernacle. It can be offered to God as long as you have a priest who is purified and able to do so. So, all right, so Samuel, and I'm going to reread some of 8, because we had read into 8 a little bit, but thankfully we didn't get terribly far in 8. And I think Jerry's not here tonight, but we were joking about the fact that we never could quite seem to get through a whole chapter. It would take us, a class and a half to get through a whole chapter. through Samuel, which is fine. It works out to be whatever it is. But
and the parsha is egg, means egg. So
yes.
fitting.
So I'm going to read a little bit of Samuel. We'll start in chapter 8. So 1 Samuel 8. And again, for those of you who weren't here the last time or have just forgotten since we stopped because it has been over a year, we are treating 1st and 2nd Samuel as one book. So when I say we're doing a Samuel study, it's just we're reading them chronologically as one whole thing. Because it wasn't always split into two. It was considered at one point just a collective body of literature, and later on, just for organization's sake, it becomes 1st and 2nd Samuel. But it also does that due to authorship, because Samuel has credited with having 4 different authors. Samuel writes some of it, and then the rest of it is written by several who come after him. His sons, I think Nathan, I have to look again, but those are the ones. It's more than one author, so that's largely why it gets split up. But anyway, so in chapter 8, when Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges over Israel. His firstborn was named Yoel, while his second son was named Abiah. They were judges in Beersheba. However, his sons did not follow his way of life. They turned off it to pursue riches, so that they would take bribes to distort justice. All the leaders of Israel gathered themselves together, approached Samuel in Ramah, and said to him, "Look, you have grown old, and your sons are not following your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations." Samuel was not pleased to hear them say, "Give us a king to judge us." So he prayed to Adonai. Adonai said to Samuel, "Listen to the people, to everything they say to you, for it is not you they are rejecting me. They don't want me to be king over them. They're doing to you exactly what they have been doing to me from the day I brought them out of Egypt until today." It's kind of terrifying. "By abandoning me and serving other gods. So do what they say, but give them a sober warning, telling them what kinds of rulings their king will make." So Samuel ordains his sons as judges. They're supposed to take after his position, being Levites themselves. They're supposed to become priests and to minister to the people. They're supposed to teach Torah to the people. They're supposed to run an altar and within the tabernacle when it's running again. But they do what we all pray our children and grandchildren don't do, which is they take on the ways of the world. They take on a love of riches. And so in order to get the riches, they bribe and steal from the people who very likely are giving them money, providing the riches as ministers. And then, of course, in their lust for these things, they abuse it. Israel asks Samuel for a king, which is, this is all kind of terrible. Like, Israel is not in a righteous place. Israel is going after other gods, but they understand enough to know that that these priests are doing them dirty. They understand enough that they know that Samuel's sons are not judging rightly by them in the land, which is this is very sad. But it also kind of should open our eyes a little to that even the very wicked can understand what righteousness is and what goodness and justice are. Just because you don't have a relationship with God doesn't necessarily mean you don't know anything or you can't do what's right. We're told that, don't even, in the Brit Chadashah, Yeshua tells us, don't even the Gentiles give their children good things. Aren't the pagans themselves able to give good things to their children and to give good gifts? And if they're able to do that, how much more so is it that God can give? So this is just another example of that even unrighteous people, idolaters, can recognize well, these guys are bogus, and they don't give good judgments. And in order to know good judgments, you would have had to have had some understanding of the law, which means that they're literate enough in what the Torah says to know that they're being abused by their authority. So Israel demands a king. They say, well, these aren't working, so let's have a king. Maybe that will work out for us. And of course, Israel already has laws for what a king should be, what a king should do, despite God telling them he would prefer himself to be king over Israel. And he tells us in the Torah, you shouldn't have a king. I'm your king. However, when you want a king, because that day will come, here is what he should be like. So Samuel, so we'll go back to 8:10, we'll read the rest of 8, and then we'll walk through the rest of it. Samuel reported everything Adonai had said to the people asking him for a king. He said, here's the kind of rulings your king will make. I love how he does it. He kind of excuses himself from that. It's not our king, your king. He will draft your sons and assign them to take care of his chariots, be his horsemen, and be bodyguards running ahead of his chariots. He will appoint them to serve him as officers in charge of 1,000 or 50, plowing his fields, gathering his harvest, and making his weapons and the equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters and have them be perfume makers, cooks, and bakers. He will expropriate your fields, vineyards, and olive groves, the very best of them, and hand them over to his servants. He will take the 10% tax of your crops and vineyards and give it to his officers and servants. He will take your male and female servants, your best young men, and your donkeys, and make them work for him. He will take the 10% tax of your flocks, and you will become his servants. When that happens, you will cry out on account of your king, whom you yourselves chose. But when that happens, Adonai will not answer you. However, the people refused to listen to what Samuel told them. And they said, no, we want a king over us, so that we can be like all the nations, with our king to judge us, lead us, and fight our battles. Samuel heard everything the people said, and repeated them for Adonai to hear. Adonai said to Samuel, do what they ask, and set up a king for them. So Samuel told the men of Israel, each of you return to his city. And I love that, as we just came through the Passover season, the season which it is appropriate to read about the entry into Jerusalem, the trial in the house of Caiaphas, Pilate, the crucifixion, the burial, the resurrection. Israel, in so much of its history, demands a king, wants a king who's strong and can lead them in battle. And then when they're given a king, they crucify him. They kill him. So, it just goes to when you are not walking in alignment with God, you will continually reject the very things God has given you, even the things that you may want, the things that he knows will be good for you. So, they're not walking with God now. God's like, I'm your king. Let me worship me, remain loyal to me, let me lead you, let me fight your battles, let me do all this for you. They say, no, we want a king. So he says, okay. And he provides them king after king after king, and the greatest king comes, the greatest king Israel will ever have, and is rejected. I hope none of us find ourselves in that way of rejecting what God gives us. So Samuel lists out all the behaviors that are sure to come with a monarch. He's like, these things will happen. These are guarantees. You want a king like the nations? Here's how the kings of the nations are, and here's what they do. Military conscripts for the king's wars. You have to remember, too, Israel at this point is divided up into different tribes. So there are some tribes who are fighting the Philistines. There are some tribes who are not fighting the Philistines just because they are geographically removed from that conflict. They're not all like, it's not all like today we look at a map of Israel and it's like one landmass. These are tribes who are spread out over different regions, so they don't necessarily have a dog in the fight with the Philistines directly. So you have a king. You know what that means? That means that even if you're on the other side of the Jordan and have nothing to do with fighting the Philistines, guess what? Your boys and girls are going to get drafted to either provide for the army or to serve in the army to fight. So taxation. Taxation will be imposed upon the people, not for the betterment of the region. And this is not an anti-tax like thing, so don't get that idea. But it's not about building roads. It's not about providing services, social services on behalf of the people. Rather, it is to pay for the monarch's bureaucratic systems, to pay his officers, to pay his servants, to pay the people that serve the court, and to pay, of course, for the biggest moneymaker in the world, which is for the king's wars. These abuses are not necessarily the top issue, but they are behaviors that will lead to the greater abuses. Because when the king doesn't get the tax, when he comes, when his servants, when his representatives come to collect the money that your town owes, and you don't pay, do you think the king just says, "Oh well, we'll come back another day, we'll come back another time"? No, he sends men with swords, and they say, "Oh no, you will give the money. You will pay what you owe." And so the people will find themselves not free of the problems they thought they were going to be freed of having a king, but rather they will be oppressed by the very person who they wanted to be in charge. Because many of Israel's kings end up forgetting God during their rule. David has moments where he forgets God. Now he kind of makes it in the end, but there are many times where David's behavior is a detriment to Israel. Solomon forgets God. Many of their sons forget God to vast extents, so much so that the temple ends up becoming sort of nondescript. The priesthood isn't functioning. No one's reading from the law. No one's teaching the law. No offerings are being made. They're just existing. The king's in charge, but they're just existing. So we may become like the nations. And this is the constant battle we find Israel weighing itself with Adonai. We want, and much like us as well in our own lives, is that we want God, but we want God on our own terms. We want God, but we don't necessarily want to be ruled by God. This is a position we all have to be on guard against, lest you end up like the kings of Israel who were unrighteous. Because it's always when their guard is down that they end up living the very opposite life of what the king of Israel is called to be. Called to not have many horses. What are they going to do to get many horses? Not have many chariots. What are they going to do? They get many chariots. Not have many wives. What are they going to do? Specific, not naming any names, but at least one. What is he going to do? Many wives, many concubines. So they end up going in the opposite direction of what they were expected to do. They're expected to write a copy of the law and to have it with them at all times that they may study in it day and night. What do? We don't have any record of them doing that. So wanting God on your own terms is, and we have to remember, that's the difference between the nations and who God calls us to be. The nations, particularly a lot of the pagan religions, don't require a lot of loyalty to who God is. There's a certain loyalty to certain ritual and to certain observances, but it's just a system. It's just a setup of things you do and participate in and do it with other people. God is a person. God is personal. God exists to have relationship with, and he desires relationship with each of us. It's why God is described as who he is. It's why the triunity of God is described the way it is. That Father, Son, and Holy Spirit exist in perfect unity, in perfect love. We are created in the image of God. We're expected to ourselves embrace God in this idea of perfect unity, of perfect love. An example of that is when you begin to gain joy from watching someone else's interaction with another, that's when you know you love one or both of those people. Because even though you receive nothing directly from that relationship, you are able to exist in harmony and in love with those people. And when a mother loves a child and they laugh together, a father can look, a husband can look, two things. A husband and a father can look and then love that which he sees and love those people even more, even though he's not at the moment involved. At the moment, he's standing off watching to the side. All of us are supposed to be that way, to exist where we can all look at one another. And even though we may not be directly receiving anything, we are, able to receive the love that flows between us all. That's what God wants. God wants us all to see each other in that light. He wants us to see him in that light, that even though we may not be on the receiving end of God's blessing in the immediate moment, when we see God blessing others, we can love both that person and God at the same time and really appreciate what's happening in that moment. This is the opposite as to how the pagans are. The pagans are, when the pagans bring offerings to God, it's a bribe. They're bribing these demons, these deities. When they bring food and incense to the idols that are set up throughout the ancient Near East, and of course this is throughout the world. It's, I gave you something, so you have to give me something in return. That's not love. Love is not, I gave you, so you have to give me. Love is, even though you brought me nothing and can never give me anything, I still want to be with you and to love you and to care for you, to bless you. That's love. So it's the difference between God and the demons. And this is why we're called to avoid, to shun, to flee idolatry. Because the only thing it can bring is an absence of love. You remove yourself from what it actually means to be human, what it means to actually be of mankind when you worship the demons, because this is why it's so heinous that Samuel's sons became involved in bribery and the lust for riches, is because none of that is of God. And and you can just say like, oh yeah, that's not of God, that's not of God. There's a lot of things that aren't of God, but bribery and lust for wealth, those things are anti-human. They're anti-man. They are the opposite of what mankind was created to be, in the image of God. So it actually does damage to you. It's why no matter where you come from in the world, every civilization, every culture has folklore of people who got greedy and wealthily greedy, and then who were destroyed because of it. It's because it is the opposite of what you're created to be. It destroys your relationship with others, and it destroys your relationship with the divine. Every culture has that. So we may become like the nations. And that's your first red flag. You are not to want to be. And in our case, of course, many of us are from the nations, but it's different in the sense that we know God, and that's the difference. These are nations who do not know God. So, start chapter 9. And we'll see if we get through it. Jerry's not here to tease me about it. So. Samuel chapter 9. There was a man from Benjamin named Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Soror, the son of Bechorath, the son of Aphiach, the son of a man from Benjamin. He was a man of substance and brave as well. He had a son named Saul, who was young and good looking. Among the people of Israel, there was no one better looking than he. He stood head and shoulders taller than anyone else in Israel. Really hyping this guy up. Once the donkeys belonging to Kish, Saul's father, got lost, Kish said to his son Saul, "Please take one of the servants with you. Go out and look for the donkeys." He went through the hills of Ephraim and the territory of Shilashah, but they did not find them. Then they went through the territory of Sha'alim, but they were not there either. They went through the territory of Benjamin, but didn't find them there. On reaching the territory of Zuph, Saul said to the servant with him, "Come, let's go back. Otherwise my father will stop thinking about the donkeys and will start worrying about us." His servant replied, "Here now, there's a man of God in this city, a man who is highly respected, and everything he says proves true. Let's go to him. Maybe he can tell us something about where we should go." "But look," Saul said to the servant, "if we go to the man, what can we bring him? We've used up all the bread in our packs, and there's nothing for us to give the man of God. What do we have left?" The servant replied again to Saul, "See, I have here in my hand a silver quarter, shekel. I will give it to the man of God to tell us which way to go." In Israel, back in the old days, when someone went to consult God, he would say, "Come, let's go to the seer," because a person now called a prophet used to be called a seer. "Well said," Saul answered his servant. "Come on, let's go." So the word used here to describe Kish is the same word, it's the Hebrew word Gibor. So he was a great man, a mighty man. It's the same word that describes the descendants of the Nephilim, the Giborim, the mighty, the powerful, a tyrant, a great substance, something of greatness attached to it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are great in an evil sense, because oftentimes we attach Giborim to things like the Nephilim, mighty men, the great men of greatness. Strength isn't always an unrighteous thing, but there are a lot of times where strength is used wrongfully by unrighteous men, but this is not the sense with Kish, thankfully. Thankfully here, what it's likely doing is attributing the power of Kish's wealth to the reader. So he's a man of means. So Saul is not coming from a father who, doesn't have anything. And this is a man who is, these donkeys are probably important to him, but not so important that Saul thinks that his father's going to worry more about the donkeys than himself. So thankfully. So he's not a Disney villain, at least. All right. Let's see. Yeah, that's a very human moment. That's another reason I love Samuel. If we don't come back soon, they're going to worry about us. These are things that you have to remember. So much of the scriptures after the Torah and after Joshua, things like Judges, Samuel, Chronicles, Kings, are court records. These would have been written by scribes to record the happenings of Israel as they were going throughout its history, through its time. And so I love that they remember things like this, because it could be very bland and very archaic and academic and just disgustingly dry. But they actually remember that this is a book of human experiences with God. And in books like Samuel, there's even less experiences with God and more just human experiences as they relate to one another. So if we don't go back to search for a suit, so makes you wonder how old Saul is at this point, because that's a very boy-like thing to say. I mean, very childish, not childish as in like stupid and immature, but it's something a child would say. my parents are going to be worried about me if I don't get back home soon. Or they're going to send out a search party for me if I don't get home soon. But you also have to remember, so much of this culture has remained largely unchanged in this part of the world. And, adults in these families, especially wealthy families like Kish, would have been very tied to the apron strings, if you will. My father works in Saudi Arabia. He teaches Saudi princes to fly helicopters. And they are all very much tied to their homes, to their fathers, their mothers. And even when they're kind of going off into the world as men, they're flying helicopters, they're getting married, they're always they go back to their father's house. One of them even had told my dad, his instructor, oh yeah, we just built this extension to my father's house for me and my wife, and so now we're going to go back and live there with them. So, this idea of, you hit 18 and you better get out in the world and the workforce and do that is a very recent thing, it's a very new thing that only has existed for the last 100 years, give or take. Post-war economic boom, great thing, but it's new. The rest of the world, as we read about here in ancient times, and still kind of preserved in cultures that live in those regions of the world today, staying closely knit and closely tied to your family, close at home to the point of even living in the same structure as a large extended family is normal. So I love that this kind of gives us a little bit of insight. And those are the things, when you're reading the Bible, pay attention. Pay attention to how involved the authorship of the scriptures are to each of our realities. The scriptures are not, we often put scripture in this place where we treat it as if it fell from heaven, and therefore it cannot be touched or examined or embraced, whereas it should be. The scriptures are a product of a combined effort of God and man. And so, as much as God's fingerprint exists on it, there is just as much of man's fingerprint on it. It relates to the human experience. And that's one reason why I love these little nuggets that appear when you're reading. That it's very human. Saul is very human. And, we often remember him as the villain later on in the story with David. And keep that in mind as well, that you can start out as a boy, worried about your father becoming worried about you, worried and concerned, a basic human fear that you're going to fret your parents because you're out too late at night looking for the donkeys. You can start just fine. And later on, if you're not watchful, become the villain, become the enemy. And it should cause us, that there should be a healthy degree of fear there. That if I'm not careful, I can one day be a friend of God and later become an enemy if I'm not watchful. So we have to be careful. So so they're trying to find something to bring to pay Samuel a fee. Remember, this is a society that is very much based on the idea of honor and of honoring the people who are doing you a great service, particularly if it's in relationship with God. So, a priest, it's why God even commands, yes, you bring stuff to the tabernacle that isn't just for me. Some of it actually goes to the priests to sustain their lives and their living, not so they get exuberantly wealthy, but so that way they're actually able to live. So it's customary to bring gifts to these people who are honored throughout society. The Queen of Sheba, she visits Solomon. What does she bring? A whole camel train of stuff to Solomon. Jacob, when he sends his sons to Egypt, he doesn't send them empty-handed. He sends balsam, honey, gum, myrrh, pistachios, and almonds to Joseph because he's the vizier of Egypt. He's a ruler. He's someone who you're supposed to honor. But in this case, Samuel is a humble prophet, and a shekel of silver seems to suffice in their minds. So anyway, continue reading. Saul answers his servant, "Come on, let's go." So they went to the city where the man of God was. Ascending the slope to the town, they found girls going out to draw water and asked them, "Is the seer here?" The girls answered them, "He's here. He's right ahead of you. Hurry now. He just came into the city today because the people are sacrificing today at the high place. Find him as soon as you enter the city before he goes up to the high place to eat, because the people won't eat until he comes and blesses the sacrifice. Afterwards, the ones invited will eat. So go on up, because this is when you will find him." So Saul and his servant, they don't just stumble into a random sacrifice going on. This is a notable event, and it's an event that was planned. So this was a routine event. This was something that happened regularly enough that the girls were just like, "Oh yeah, like we know where he is, we know where he's going to be, and we know exactly what he's going to be doing." So much so that we know that no one will actually eat until he arrives to commence and to bless the offering. And again, this is probably just one of Samuel's stops, one of his routine places where he comes and ministers to the people through the act of sacrifice as a priest. Hurry. There's again, going back to like human moments, there's a level of excitement in their voice. They're telling them, "Hurry, because he's come today." When you live in a society that revolves around the offering and the sacrifice, it's a big deal. It's a big deal when the priest comes to town, because this is one of the many things that allows the people to be connected with God. This is one of the things that draws them all together into this communal meal, this communal sacrifice with God and with each other. Again, the whole town is showing up to this. And it's the fact that he's doing it. And he's not just a priest. He's the seer. He's the prophet. This is a special event. This is something that they seem to be excited about. And of course, this is probably a free will offering made by multiple people at once. So it's a sacrifice that will be eaten by those who are bringing it, by those who are in attendance. So, who doesn't like a good meal? We were all here together just sharing a minute ago and partaking in food and drink together. There's a reason why we continue to do that even today. It's not, on one hand, on like the business end of things, we understand that it's very difficult to get out of school and after school activities and after work and to then rush over here for study right during the dinner time. So there is food provided for that. So those of you who are online who decided to stay at home, there's food. Come and taste. Taste and see. But it also is sort of a remnant of that idea that when we gather together to experience God, to learn Scripture, that there is a communal meal involved, and had been for forever. From Abraham on, it is meal symbolism. So whenever people joke about when I talk about food and stuff during messages and whatnot, I'm not just doing that as a joke or because I think it's funny, even though sometimes it is. I appreciate the message of that this is not just something we do for the practical sense of people got to eat, but it's a reminder that God desires intimate communion with us, and he desires us all to have communion with one another, that we would exist together. that we would eat together. When you eat together, you are placing a sense of trust in everyone around you. You are trusting that no one has slipped poison into your food or your drink. You are trusting that no one has, undercooked your food or overcooked your food, which may be a greater crime. I'm not sure. Because I've had some. What's it called? I forget the name at the moment, but raw beef, beef blue or whatever. It's pretty good. So, but so food is important. It's not just a kind of a quirky thing I like to talk about, but it's something that extends from the altar of the temple of God to the altars of the local regions, the high places of the local regions, into our own homes. So we're going to read some more. 15. The day before Saul arrived, Adonai had given Samuel a revelation. Tomorrow, at about this time, I will send you a man from the territory of Benjamin. You are to anoint him prince over my people Israel. He will save my people from the power of the Philistines, because I have seen my people's situation, and their cry of distress has come to me. When Samuel saw Saul, Adonai said to him, "Here is the man I told you about, the one who is going to govern my people." Saul approached Samuel in the gateway and said, "Please tell me where the seer's house is." Samuel answered Saul, "I am the seer. Go up ahead of me to the high place, because you are going to dine with me today. In the morning I will let you leave, and I will tell you everything that is on your heart. As for your donkeys that got lost 3 days ago, don't worry about them. They have been found. Now who is it that all Israel wants? Isn't it you and all your father's household?" Saul replied, "I'm only a man from Benjamin, the smallest tribe in Israel, and my family is the least important of all the families in the tribe of Benjamin. Why are you saying such a thing to me?" Samuel took Saul and his servant, brought them into the room, and had them sit in the place reserved for the most important of the invited guests, who numbered about 30 persons. Samuel instructed the cook, "Serve the portion I gave you and told you to set aside." The cook took the thigh and the adjoining meat and served it to Saul. Samuel said, "Here is what remains. Put it in front of you and eat. It was kept especially for you until the right time, because I said, I have invited the people." So Saul dined with Samuel that day. On coming down from the high place of the city, he spoke with Saul on the roof. You have to remember that most of the time, these people spent their waking hours on the roofs of their homes. These were the living rooms, if you will. Because you would normally, if you had a 2-story house, it was animals on the bottom. Everyone slept in the second level, the inside section, no shoes, preferably. And then up on the roof is where you would have all have spent your time. And there would have been, little, I forget what you would call them. There is a proper name for them, but basically umbrellas. You would have had shade casting fixtures on the top of the roof that would keep the sun off of you. So that way it was a pleasant place to respite. They got up early, about daybreak. Samuel called out to Saul on the roof, "Get up, so I can send you on your way." Saul got up, and both of them, he and Samuel, went out. As they were going down at the edge of the city, Samuel said to Saul, "Tell the servant to go on ahead." So the servant went on. "But you, stand still now, because I want you to hear what God has said." So Saul and the servant are brought to the head of the table. And again, we know from Yeshua's parables, who gets brought to the head of the table? Kings. Well, but it's the place of honor. It's the place where, if you are the expected guest, the most waited upon groom, then, you were brought to the front. And so here's, this boy and his servant, and they're not even from this town, but how cool is that? You show up, you're not even from this place, you're not from this village, and the prophet's like, "No, you come up to the front, to the head of the table." again, this sort of, it's not just because Samuel recognizes who he is, who God has shown him to be, but this is also part of hospitality. This is a part of what it means, when someone comes to you, comes into your home, you are to give them the greatest honor that you can, that you have. Obviously, you have to be reasonable. God expects you to act within your means of what is honorable, but treat them with honor, treat them with respect. This relationship is, and they're to be protected. You guard the honor and virtue of your guests. I know I was paying attention to stories from even Afghanistan, not in too many recent years past, where we would have Americans would show up to certain regions and would offend many of their Arab hosts, because they would be so on edge with protection, and they would be like, no, you were my guest, I will protect you, or I will die, trying to protect you. Me and my men, you are our honored guests. Same idea, very same culture. If you want to have an idea about what so much of the culture looked like, again, read a lot of Arab culture. A lot of Arab culture is still holds on to a lot of that ancient Near Eastern practice and understanding of hospitality. But again, the Arabs are also descended from Abraham. So, all right. So yes. So Yeshua instructs us not to seek a higher seat. They don't go when they're seeking the higher seat, but they're brought to the front. So Saul, the villain, obeys the words of Yeshua, not seeking out the highest seat, but instead is brought up to the front of the table. He's served the set-aside portion, the portion that is set aside for. That's why when Samuel's like, "You will dine with me," you will dine off of part of what I am being offered and given by the people who brought these offerings. The priestly bit that is reserved for me, I will share with you. So the working priest always receives a portion of the offering. This is clear in Leviticus. Leviticus 7 talks about the breast of the animal. That is the part of the animal when offered. That is by right belongs to the priest. The right thigh is also a portion of the animal that by right belongs to the Kohen, to the priest making the offering. So either of these portions of the animal can be set aside for the priest when he's done doing his work. The breast, of course, is one of the more savory cuts of any animal. Any of you who looked at like a cutaway of where to make certain animal cuts, where some of the best parts of beef is in the front quarter. Some of the chicken, obviously, cook it right. Don't be making dried chicken now. But some of the best chicken, or pigeon's very similar, is in the breast. If you cook it right, it's a very tender, very savory part of the animal. Sometimes we would just call this brisket. Saul is offered what by right belongs to Samuel. Which, in kind of a funny way, because remember, this is a priestly thing, kind of harkens us forward to another figure we'll see in the book of Samuel, who partakes of what by right belongs to the priest. Who is that? David. David partakes of the bread which is reserved only for the priests. And this, of course, brings us right in line with how God brings people into fellowship with himself, is to, one, turn to God and be filled. Come to the place where God is. And that's why there are places, temple, tabernacle, high places, where you would go, and again, pay attention. I'll say that a lot, probably. Pay attention when these people are experiencing God, having an encounter with God. Where does Gideon have an encounter with God? The the threshing floor. What were threshing floors known for? People gathered there. There was normally an altar there. There were cultic sites. There were sites where, people anticipated meeting with God if he came to visit during these moments of worship. Turn to God and be filled. This pattern is so intrinsic to God's pattern of redemption that Yeshua defines who he is ultimately as a source of spiritual food and drink. Partaking of a meal with God is so much a part of what God sets up for us to see, that when Yeshua describes himself, he describes himself as bread and as wine. So Yeshua said to them, Amen, amen, I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in yourselves. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on that last day. My flesh is real food, and my blood is real drink. John 6. Whoever drinks of the water that I will give to him shall never be thirsty. The water I give him will become a fountain of water within him, springing up to eternal life. Moreover, I tell you that many will come from the east and the west. They will all recline at table with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. So Yeshua's words in the Gospels are full of relating him to food and drink, to that which satiates and nourishes. And that is what God desires. That's why God gets so frustrated with Israel, because if only Israel would embrace him, then all of these needs they desire outside of him would be filled. They wouldn't need the things they desire through idols. They wouldn't need the king. They wouldn't need to always be the victorious champions of the battlefield, because God would satisfy that hunger. God would provide the protection. And again, God's not out to be bribed. That's why God doesn't show up when they take the ark into combat. You can't force his hand. It's why when God does show up to a lot of these offering points in these areas in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, it's at altars during fellowship offerings, during Thanksgiving offerings, peace offerings. They're not out doing war dances, getting God on their side to go fight. Rather, they're properly entering into a place and space where they are entering into a relationship with God as who he is, Father in heaven, King. And so we'll have to go over more the next time. But that's where we are tonight. Look at that. Finished 8 and 9 tonight. Oh, man, we are on a roll. Any questions before we wrap up for tonight? Any questions?
You said that last thing about Israel, embracing him and providing for him. So I'm not going to generalize all of Israel not coming to Yeshua, but
sure.
That same thing is not drinking his blood, not eating him, not doing that.
Right.
So they're just repeating continually this
Yes.
cycle?
Yes.
Okay.
They are, at the moment,
Yes.
repeating the cycle. So
It's gaining ground.
we hope so. We hope so. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
I've always found it a little disgusting that Eli would look at Hannah worshiping God with her mouth and say she's drunk, but his sons are sleeping with the women outside of the temple.
That's right.
They're drunk. And this kind of disparity is, you're blind to what your own children who are under the mandate of the living God.
Right.
But you're looking at a woman whose heart is breaking and you can't recognize because you no longer have the Spirit of God in you to recognize her pain
Right.
and her longing for a child.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. So anyway, it goes back to that whole being on watch thing.
Yeah.
You have to be on guard even with your own children.
Yes.
Because it can be very easy to look outside and see what is wrong with everything on the outside, but not watching what's right. Right.
And Hannah goes on to have more children later, right?
Yes.
Three
Yeah, she had more
boys,
children
2
after
girls.
that. But Samuel is promised to God, and he is brought up in service of the tabernacle. Yes, ma'am.
Wasn't a portion of that sacrifice holy, like consecrated unto God? Because there is a portion in Leviticus when they're
Right.
worshiping, now albeit they're supposed to eat it with God at the
Right.
altar.
Yeah, there's especially like particular of the fat portions, like some of those are cooked up entirely as the set apart portion.
So I was thinking more of the weight ones.
Like the sheaf offerings,
Yeah.
the sheep, I guess sheaf offering, heave offerings.
Heave offerings,
Yeah.
They were weighed and then.
Right, and those are set aside entirely.
And his family was to partake of that, so
Right.
it'd be similar. I'm wondering, possibly consecrating Shaul to be king? Just a question.
Yeah. No, I mean he is in a way consecrating Saul to God because God's told him this is the one, and I'll show him to you. And then he shows up, and this is Samuel's way of honoring that decision by God. Yes, ma'am.
Now, on that note, people asked for a king,
They did.
and the name Shaul means asked for.
Yes.
So that the way, the incredible interweaving that we find Saul under control.
Right. Yeah. None of this is a surprise to God, thankfully. Sometimes we're surprised to each other. But
And the boy that he's with just kind of melts away from the story. Like,
I don't know what happens to the servant after this. I don't think we're told. As I'm getting through all of Samuel, if he reappears, I'll make sure to mention him because he does kind of disappear. But much like Abraham's servant, he's like this key part of the story, and then after that, it's kind of like,
he's never mentioned
no more.
again.
It's like, oh, he had his limelight, I guess. So, but anything else before we break?
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Oh, about this? Yeah, it's hot, and I'm getting ready for training, so I figured I would just preemptively start. I looked at the temperature on Sunday, and it was going to get up to like 80 today, and I said, yeah, the sheep needs to go. Because you don't notice it so much when you're inside, but when you're outside working, it's a hot one. So, yes, thank you all for being here. Y'all be safe getting home, and we will see you, some of you on Wednesday, some of you on Thursday, some of you not at all, some of you both days, some of you on Shabbat. Hopefully all of you.